CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Robin Dwyer.
And I'm Luigi Barkil. Our top stories. China's President Xi Jinping arrives in the Saudi capital for what's being called Beijing's biggest ever diplomatic initiative in the Arab world.
China continues easing COVID restrictions, allowing quarantine at home and domestic travel without testing.
Worries grow in Taiwan over a talent exodus after the island's top chip maker triples its investment in a plant in the United States.
25 people arrested in Germany as police say they've uncovered a far-right plot to overthrow the state.
And experts say more than 1 million species are now threatened with extinction as environmental leaders meet in Canada for COP15.
China's president has arrived in Saudi Arabia for a 3-day visit. Beijing is calling the trip its biggest ever diplomatic initiative in the Arab world.
Xi Jinping has been welcomed in Riyadh by Saudi royal officials. The trip will include bilateral talks and wider events with other Arab leaders. Dozens of trade and economic agreements worth nearly $30 billion are also expected to be signed. Our correspondent Adel Al-Mahrouki is in Riyadh for us. Adel, good to see you. What are we expecting then from this visit, being billed as very important by both sides? What's on the agenda?
A lot of discussions. First, bilateral ties between Saudi Arabia and China, where a series of agreements, economic agreements in numerous fields will be signed that will sum up to about $30 billion from infrastructure, transportation, technology, finance, and even more. Collaboration between the two countries is going to see its biggest single-time agreements, series of them signed at the same time as the bilateral talks kicks off tomorrow. After that, the expansion of the dialogue will go beyond Saudi Arabia to include all of the Gulf Cooperation Council countries. All 6 oil producers in the Arabian Gulf will be sitting with the Chinese President Xi Jinping to discuss expanded cooperation in the region. Followed after that, on Friday, will be the Arab League summit, which heads of states of 22 Arab countries will be coming here to Riyadh to hold the first of its kind China-Arab League summit. And it's because of the essential importance of that meeting for the Arab League, the organization has brought forward its annual Arab League summit that was scheduled to be taking place next year, and it brought it early to this month in December specifically to have and highlight the importance of the ties between the Arab League and China.
You mentioned oil there. Energy is obviously a key part of the relationship between the two countries, and there are possible developments when it comes to oil already.
Energy, of course, is a cornerstone in the trade ties between Saudi Arabia and China. And in recent years, we've been seeing China developing the format, the financial format for its trade between China and Arab countries. An example for that was Egypt, where the reliance on the US dollars have been lifted a bit because there is an existing strong trade volume between the two countries. Some of that, the portion that it can be switched into direct currency exchanges between the Egyptian pound and the yuan. A similar example is set to be confirmed officially yet, and the meetings will unravel the details of which, but a similar financial platform shall be announced through which oil could be part traded into yuan and have a direct exchange in the trade volume that existed. Again, this is just subject to official confirmation and announcement, the details of which will come up when confirmed during tomorrow's talks between China and Saudi Arabia.
And just looking at how the rest of the world views this, President Biden, the US leader, was in Saudi Arabia not too long ago in a somewhat frosty trip there. I wonder, with the tensions between Saudi Arabia's relationship with the US, does that make this trip any more important, do you think?
Of course, the tension brings a lot of attention. The tension brings a lot of attention to what is being held here in terms of the series of summit and the grand summit level attention it has been getting from the Arab world as well, putting Saudi Arabia at the center of the Arab League as a country gathering all Arab leaders for a stronger partnership with China. But that trend of strong relationship between China, Saudi Arabia and the Arab world in general has been ongoing for many years, way before Biden took the helm at the White House. We've seen since 2004 the establishment of the China-Arab Forum, a series of official meetings for cooperation and development in the Arab world. Now the summit is the first of its kind, and it crowns this 18 years long effort to bolster ties. But what is more significant is that the strength and the speed of the ties with the Gulf countries have significantly developed within the past 6 years. This is the second visit for President Xi Jinping to Saudi Arabia. The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, has also paid a visit, all an indication that Saudi Arabia is looking at China for a future strong partnership.
Okay, Adel, thanks for that. That's our correspondent, Adel Al-Mahrouki in Riyadh.
Saudi Arabia wants to attract more Chinese visitors as it tries to become a top global tourism destination by 2030.
Ahead of this visit by President Xi, I spoke to Fahad Hamidardin, CEO of the Saudi Tourism Authority in Riyadh, about the importance of bilateral ties.
No ambitious destination can do without China. China is definitely one of our top strategic, top 5, I would say, to be just safe, but definitely up there. In terms of strategic source markets. We've opened 3 offices. We've signed, despite the closure, and we've already managed to sign 700 trade partners agreements, from the largest Trip.com to so many in the 3 destinations. We have 2 direct flights, to both Riyadh and Jeddah, and we translate that by ensuring that our destinations are not just China friendly, but China personalized, because with technology we can do a lot. So our partnerships on payment with like the China Union Pay, Alipay, all of that is now signed, and we are embarking on getting more DMCs. We've managed to see 2 Chinese DMCs setting up in Saudi, and I'm expecting a lot more as as China opens up again.
So the first China-Arab summit will take place on Friday as part of President Xi's visit to Saudi Arabia. Our correspondent Yasser Hakim reports.
First Sino-Arab summit this year is a culmination of the China-Arab Cooperation Forum launched in 2004 and reflects the strong ties forged throughout the years.
We see eye to eye to the Middle East problem and the Palestinian-Israeli problem, which has been prolonged. China has always been a member of a strong supporter of developing countries, including the Arab world. China does not interfere in internal politics of other countries. So in this, we are 100% together, the Arab world and China.
The Sino-Gulf and Sino-Arab summits are to discuss pressing issues like conflicts in Syria, Libya, Palestine and Ukraine. But observers believe there is more at stake.
The forum comes at a time when the whole world is changing. The whole system, world order comes at the top. Political problems comes at the top of the discussions. We're aware that China always is a big supporter of Arab cases.
And experts believe China, as an emerging world power, would create balance and stability for a volatile region. But it's not all politics. The agenda of talks also include promoting economic cooperation and fostering bilateral trade and investments. The Middle East offers huge economic potential for the Asian power.
Bilateral trade between China and the Arab countries is more than $400 billion, and over 30% of it with Saudi Arabia. We expect to see new investments, new incentives from both sides, investments in energy, in infrastructure. There are huge Saudi and UAE investments in China as well, and incentives to open Arab markets to China.
And building strong economic ties would be a win-win situation.
China has become a strong competitor to the West, who had dominated the region economically, politically, and militarily. I believe that deals with China will strengthen the position of Arab countries in international trade. Winning China on our side will be of great benefit for Arab nations.
And definitely these summits in Riyadh will be closely watched by the rest of the world. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo, Egypt.
China's leaders have mapped out the nation's economic plan for next year at a meeting of the Communist Party of China's Central Committee. They've agreed to pay special attention to ensuring growth and employment, as well as combating corruption. The meeting on Tuesday, overseen by President Xi Jinping, also emphasized the need to attract and use foreign investment.
And we have the latest data on China's foreign trade. For the first 11 months of this year, total imports and exports reached $5.8 trillion US. That's an 8.6% increase in yuan terms compared to the same period last year. But trade in November only grew 0.1% in yuan terms, and in dollar terms showed a sharp drop, well below analysts' expectations. ASEAN remains China's largest trading partner, with total trade volume up 15.5%. It was followed by the European Union and then the United States.
China has announced a further easing of COVID rules. New guidelines mean that some people will be able to quarantine at home rather than in a state facility. And some testing requirements have also been scrapped. From Beijing, our correspondent Jen Chunying reports.
A further relaxation of COVID control measures. According to the new guidelines announced by the State Council, China now allows people with asymptomatic or mild COVID to quarantine at home rather than in state facilities. PCR test requirements have been scrapped for most public venues, except for hospitals and schools. Interprevention travel is also eased, with no more health QR codes and upon-arrival tests required. During a conference held by the National Health Commission, officials highlighted the relaxed control policies are based on the scientific fact that the Omicron variant has become less lethal, more people are vaccinated, and the country has more experience in COVID prevention.
We have been actively optimizing and refining our COVID-19 response according to the situation. Now China has entered a new phase of COVID prevention and control, and we will take the best control measures for the Chinese people to minimize impact on people's livelihoods.
Officials say the country is well prepared with improved diagnosis and treatment, as well as sufficient supply of medicines to cope with the challenges ahead.
There's no need to rush to stock up on antigen kits or medicines at all. We have ensured that enough kits in both Western and Chinese traditional medicine for fever and cold exist at all pharmacies across the country.
The country has also called for more efforts in reinforcing medical resources, including adding more fever clinics, hospital beds, and ICU beds to better prepare for the potential increase in patients. And officials also stressed the need to accelerate the vaccination of elderly people, saying getting the shot is both safe and beneficial for the seniors. Zheng Chunying, CGTN, Beijing.
I've been speaking to John Gong, Professor of Economics at Beijing's University of International Business and Economics, about what the easing of restrictions means for China's economy.
In terms of impact on the economy, I think it bodes very good news for the people in the service sectors, the restaurant industry, the retail industries. They're going to be open, and people are going to open up their wallets, and I think the economy will come back with a vengeance.
And how much of China's economic challenges are down to the impact of COVID restrictions? There are other issues at play as well.
Well, I think certainly, the economic aspect is a major factor in their consideration process, as I'm just guessing. We have been seeing lockdowns, practically lockdowns, in many cities in China, and this thing, cannot be sustainable in my view.
We've had some disappointing figures on imports and exports. Why is that, do you think?
Look at the November exports number. It's actually still increasing, though, increasing by a little bit less than 1%, and imports are decreasing by more or less the same amount, about 1%. I think this is actually expected against the backdrop of a global recession we're facing right now. When you look at the two biggest markets for China's exports, United States and European Union, they're all experiencing recessions at this point. So I think even against that backdrop, we're still recording a modest increase. It's remarkable in any case, in my view. But looking forward, I think we're getting into a very difficult time. I think in December, January, maybe we're seeing decreasing numbers, but that's okay. I think Chinese exports are still very competitive, especially I think in the exports of automobile market. China is now the second largest exporter of automobiles, already having surpassed Germany at this point. So I think exports are still quite competitive, but against a very difficult period of time, we're seeing potentially seeing some setbacks, and that would be expected.
So that's the short-term outlook, but what about longer term? Will the boost from easing COVID restrictions last?
I think, as I said, I think the economy will come back with some vengeance. This is the historical experience that we have seen in the past. For example, in the 1919 Spanish flu, the decade immediately after that, saw a very strong economic performance in many parts of the world. I think, especially right after right after the relaxation of this policy, I would expect that there's a pent-up demand of a lot of things. Travel, for example, people going to restaurants, people spending money on in the service sectors, and all these things. I would imagine they will happen definitely in the first few months of next year. So the economy will typically, we call it in economics, we call it a Z recovery pattern. We'll see a very strong rebound and then gradually tapering off. I would expect the same pattern will unfold in next year, in the next 2 years, I would say.
Still ahead of Global Business Europe, weighing in on a long-standing trade dispute between China and Lithuania. The EU says it's time for the World Trade Organization to get involved.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and the bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
Welcome back. And do remember that CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Police in Germany have arrested 25 people on suspicion of plotting to overthrow the government.
A group of far-right and ex-military figures were reportedly planning to storm the German parliament and seize power. A minor aristocrat and a Berlin judge are among those detained.
Let's head to Berlin and speak to our correspondent, Peter Oliver. Peter, talk us through then what we know about this truly remarkable story.
truly remarkable indeed. Prosecutors here are saying that they have foiled a plot by a domestic terror organisation. That's the terminology being bandied around here by those who took part in this operation, this investigation. Early in the morning on Wednesday, dawn raids took place. 25 people arrested. 8 of those have been remanded in custody. What we do know is that searches took place at over 160 different sites, with 3,000 officials involved in the investigation. It was in relation to what's been called an attempt to overthrow the German government that involved a minor noble, a former commander of the German paratroop force, a sitting judge and former MP, and a group known as the Reichsbürger. Now, they are a collective that estimates say have around 20,000 or so members across Germany. They ultimately don't believe in the legality of the current German state. They say that the constitution of Germany pre-World War II was never officially nullified, and therefore the creation of the Federal Republic of Germany, West Germany, in 1949 was done so illegally, and then again the reunification of Germany in the early 90s equally as invalid. Now, these arrests took place following an investigation into another Reichsbürger plot that was foiled by authorities back in October of this year. And that initial plan was to kidnap the health minister, Karl Lauterbach. Now, this plot, though, what we've seen on Wednesday that's been foiled, the idea had been to take over the German government. They say that they had put in place a council, as it was called. They had put forward people that would take over positions if they were successful. It seems to have been an incredibly well thought out plan. That investigations, of course, are still really underway into how deep this went.
And looking at the possible extremist link, just how much of a threat are far-right groups in Germany at the moment, and how worried are ordinary people about all of this?
Well, we have seen far-right terror attacks in Germany turn fatal. In Hanau, of course, there was a number of people that were murdered by a far-right gunman. We've also seen attacks in various smaller scale. Some of those, though, I say smaller scale, have been fatal as well. But if we look at who the Reichsbürger are, I mentioned an attempt in October to try and kidnap the health minister. They were also at the very centre back in 2020 of an attempt to storm the Bundestag, storm the Reichstag building where the German parliament sits. That was part of an anti-COVID measure demonstration that really escalated and got out of hand. The Reichsbürger were at the crux of that, as they have been at this particular plot to try and overthrow the German government. We'll be expecting to hear more about what's going to happen next on Thursday. The prosecutor, the Attorney General, wasn't taking questions from the press as he spoke to them on Wednesday. We'll be looking to hear more, and as soon as we do, of course, I'll bring it to you here on CGTN.
Thanks for that, Peter. That's our correspondent, Peter Oliver, live in Berlin.
The European Union is asking the World Trade Organization to challenge China's decision to apply trade restrictions against Lithuania.
Beijing has limited imports from the Baltic countries since last December, with trade between the two countries slumping by 80%. Our correspondent, Alex Cadier, has the story.
The EU says it's time for the World Trade Organization to weigh in on a long-standing trade dispute between China and Lithuania. The view from Brussels is that Beijing's restrictions of Lithuanian exports and high-tech patents are discriminatory and restrictive. China placed these restrictions on Lithuanian exports and EU exports with Lithuanian products from December 2021, following Lithuania's decision to allow Taiwan to open a de facto embassy in Vilnius, a move which Beijing says threatens China's territorial integrity. Beijing has also limited the ability of companies to use foreign courts to protect high-tech patents, a move which the EU says it will challenge at the WTO.
We see that this is against WTO TRIPS rules, and this undermines the possibility of our patent holders to protect their intellectual property and to receive adequate remuneration for their intellectual property.
But China's Commerce Ministry said it regretted the EU's decision and that China would handle the matter in line with WTO dispute settlement procedures and would resolutely safeguard its legitimate rights and interests. This trade dispute comes just a week after EU Council President Charles Michel met with President Xi Jinping in Beijing and is likely to be a bone of contention between the two economic powerhouses for some time to come. Alex Cadier, CGTN, Brussels.
Local officials say Taiwan remains chipmaker TSMC's most important production base. It comes after the company announced it would more than triple its US investment at a new facility in Arizona. President Joe Biden hailed the announcement as a win for American manufacturing during a tour of the site on Tuesday. Well, let's talk to our correspondent John Terrett in New York. So, John, is this TSMC investment getting attention in the US?
Hey, Robin. Hey, Noeed. Yeah, you bet it is. Although I have to say, it is actually behind the Georgia Senate re-election story, which is very, very politically important here in the United States. But beyond that, it certainly is. And the event in Arizona, in Phoenix, was a star-studded business event. Tim Cook was there, Morris Chang from Taiwan Semiconductor itself, Sanjay Mehrotra from Micron, one of the chip makers here, and Jensen Huang from NVIDIA, which tends to make or is known for making microchips for video games. But the headline news is that Taiwan Semiconductor is indeed investing $40 billion in that site in Phoenix, Arizona. And that represents a tripling of what they intended to do originally. Originally, they just wanted to have one factory there, which they're now in the late stages of completing. And now they plan to have a second one. They had what they call a tool-in yesterday, which is where they move the first part of the production line into the factory. That's what they call it. And of course, on hand to praise everybody involved, including himself and his administration, President Joe Biden. Here's what he had to say.
TSMC is investing $40 billion here in Arizona, the largest foreign investment in the history of this state. Over 10,000 construction jobs and 10,000 high-tech jobs will be created. As we see here in Phoenix, the United States is a top destination for companies across the globe looking to make invest because we have a world-class, highly skilled, committed workforce.
Well, as you heard, it represents pretty much the biggest ever foreign inward investment into the United States. But the Taiwanese economy minister has been talking within the last 24 hours, pointing out that Taiwan Semiconductor has no intention of moving its headquarters or anything like that from Taiwan to the United States. Despite this huge investment, it will still be the main base for Taiwan Semiconductor. Of course, he was speaking with the backdrop of strained relations between Beijing and Taipei. And I have to say that here in America, there are some who wonder about the wisdom of putting all the eggs in one basket, as it were, with Taiwan Semiconductor in Arizona, given the fact that the relationship between Beijing and Taipei goes unresolved. Robin?
And John, there has been some movement on easing restrictions on Chinese tech. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, that's right. Now, this is really the same story. And what it's all about is that President Joe Biden doesn't want to have a microchip shortage, a supply chain issue, like he had on his hands when he first came to the White House in 2021. If you remember then, America almost ran out of microchips for almost everything. And part of that was that the big three in Detroit, the big three automakers, phoned up their Asian suppliers and said, don't worry about sending us everything you've got. We're not going to need them now because we're deep in problems with COVID-19. And what happened was people in America spent their stimulus money on brand new cars and second-hand cars, and the car makers couldn't make enough vehicles because they didn't have enough microchips. So Biden wants to avoid that. However, in September, two leading China hawks, this would be Chuck Schumer, who's the majority leader in the Senate, and John Cornyn, the senior senator who is a Republican in the state of Texas, introduced legislation to prevent U.S. government contractors from using three Chinese microchip makers, SMIC, YMTC, and CXMT. However, Chamber of Commerce here pushed back on that, and when the final draft was published yesterday, it turns out that the final version no longer requires contractors not to buy from those Chinese companies, and the deadline for compliance has been pushed back to 5 years from 2 years. So that's really quite a significant difference, and it comes 24 hours after the White House said on Monday that U.S.-China diplomatic relations would certainly be kept open and may even expand. It doesn't mean that things are right between the two capitals, but it does seem as if, in some areas at least, improvements are being made. Robin?
John, thank you for that. That's our correspondent John Terrace in New York.
You're watching CGTN. Still to come. Hammering out a landmark agreement to preserve and restore biodiversity. Global environmental leaders gather in Canada for the UN COP15 summit.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The cleanup operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So now we've actually become the border on this road.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
The focus is firmly on future technologies.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Robin Dwyer and Norwegia Barkil. The headlines again. China's President Xi Jinping arrives in the Saudi capital for what's being called Beijing's biggest ever diplomatic initiative in the Arab world.
China continues easing COVID restrictions, allowing quarantine at home and domestic travel without testing.
And 25 people are arrested in Germany as police say they've uncovered a far-right plot to overthrow the state.
Stopping biodiversity loss, one of the world's most pressing environmental issues, is the aim of the United Nations COP15 summit getting underway in Canada.
Scientists and delegates from almost 200 countries are in Montreal as they negotiate a landmark agreement to preserve and restore biodiversity. Our correspondent Caroline Malone reports.
Conservationists say we're destroying our planet, and COP15 is a chance to take action to protect it before it's too late. Thousands of the world's experts in biodiversity are in Montreal for 2 weeks of meetings, with global leaders opening the event on Tuesday.
I don't have to tell any of you here this afternoon that nature is under threat. In fact, it's under attack. I've been speaking for just a few moments so far, but in these couple of moments, we've lost globally as much as 136 soccer fields worth of trees. And that's just one example.
Experts are already seeing the human toll on nature. Animals, plants and ecosystems are under pressure, with 1 million species at threat of extinction.
COP15 is important because the biggest irreversible change to our planet is that we are driving species to extinction 1,000 times faster than they should be going extinct. Unlike climate change, which is bad enough, you know, if you lose species, you can never get them back.
Representatives from more than 100 countries, including the US, have already agreed to commit to protect 30% of the world's land and seas by 2030, a goal known as 30 by 30. Funding is a big part of COP15 discussions, how to raise enough money for conservation goals and to rethink using subsidies on industries that pollute. The UN says hundreds of billions of dollars are needed a year, but many people at COP15 see that no price is too high to protect our world. Caroline Malone, CGTN, Washington.
Elizabeth Maruma Mrema is Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity. Our correspondent Andrew Wilson asked her about what needs to be achieved.
To be able, I think, to understand what is needed to be achieved is to understand where are we globally today on biodiversity. In the sense that biodiversity is the foundation for our life. We all depend on biodiversity for our survival. It is the food we eat, the water we drink, the air we breathe, the medicines we need, the livelihood, the cultural inspiration. I mean, when you look at all these, without which there will be no life. And yet, human activities have degraded 97% of biodiversity globally. Scientists have told us over 1 million species may go to extinction within this century at an unprecedented, and the loss of biodiversity is at an unprecedented rate in the history of humankind. We have degraded land over 75%, oceans over 66%, wetlands have disappeared or degraded 85%, 50% of coral reefs have already disappeared, and yet the global GDP, 50% of which is highly or moderately dependent on biodiversity. So our economic life globally is at risk as the result of biodiversity loss. So Montreal, what will be key is the adoption of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework to take us to that 2030 where we will be able to halt and reverse the loss of biodiversity.
So in terms of that roadmap, in terms of reaching some kind of actionable agreement, what sort of challenges stand in your way?
One is time, because this framework has been negotiated for the past 3-4 years. It has been delayed as the result of the pandemic. 2, this will be a global framework. A global framework basically expected to take into account and consideration all national interests of the 196 parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity, to take into account the interests of all stakeholders, including indigenous peoples, local communities, the business, the financial sector, the women, the youth. So you can imagine all these coming to a negotiation table to agree on just one word, leaving alone the commas and the full stop, will not be easy. The other challenge is, of course, this framework will by and large try to build lessons from the previous targets we had, the 8 biodiversity targets, which globally we are not able to reach, and therefore learning lessons from that and be able to make a difference and make sure that the new framework will not repeat the same mistakes and that the new framework will really create that change of the relationship between human beings and environment, and biodiversity or nature, which will have contributed to its degradation by 97%.
A judge in the United States has dismissed thousands of lawsuits which claim the heartburn drug Zantac caused cancer. A federal court in Florida rejected the roughly 50,000 claims, saying they weren't backed by sound science. Drug maker GSK and Sanofi, which licenses the drug, both saw their shares jump on the news. The ruling can be appealed and doesn't affect thousands of other similar cases pending in US state courts.
The United States will increase its liquefied natural gas exports to the UK after the two countries agreed an energy partnership. The aim is to double the amount of LNG shipments from the US next year compared to 2021. The two countries will also work on driving investment in clean energy and finding efficiencies as Britain tries to reduce its reliance on Russian energy supplies.
Hungary has scrapped a price cap on fuel after the measure led to severe shortages of gas and diesel.
The cap was brought in last December to tackle inflation, but it's caused a drop in fuel imports and panic buying among motorists, with some filling stations running completely dry.
Our correspondent Pablo Gutierrez reports.
For more than 1 year, owners of independent gas stations in Hungary have called on the government to scrap the price cap that set the price of fuel and diesel to 480 forints, about $1.22 per liter. They claim that it was bad for business because they couldn't make a profit selling fuel for the same price as they bought it from the state-owned oil company MOL. Hungary first capped fuel prices more than a year ago. At the time, the government said the measure was necessary to shield consumers from some of the effects of inflation, now at a two-decade high of 21%. Prime Minister Viktor Orban initially said the cap would only be in place for 3 months, but as the conflict in Ukraine dragged on, it was renewed again and again. And just 4 weeks ago, Mr. Orban publicly insisted that the cap was a necessary tool to help bring down inflationary rate to single digits by next year. Fuel consumption in Hungary rose this year by 25% compared to 2022. On top of that, there were maintenance issues at one of MOL's oil refineries, and foreign companies cut fuel shipments to Hungary after the cap was introduced. All of this created a perfect storm that led to long lines at filling stations and fuel shortages. Now that the government has abolished the cap, prices will be set according to market rates, 640 forints or $1.64 per liter of petrol, and 699 forints or $1.99 per liter of diesel. Still, many gas stations like this one are running empty, and there is no clear date on when they will receive new supplies. Pablo Gutierrez, CGTN, Vichy, Hungary.
At least 30 people have been detained in the Greek capital Athens after violent protests broke out following an annual memorial march for a 15-year-old boy who was killed by police in 2008.
The memorial came just a day after a 16-year-old boy was shot and injured by police in Greece's second-largest city of Thessaloniki. Our correspondent Evangelos Tsipsas reports.
Thousands of demonstrators marched through the streets of Athens to mark the 14th anniversary of a police killing of a teenage boy whose death triggered Greece's worst riots in decades. The protest started peacefully, however, the situation escalated. The annual march to commemorate the fatal shooting of 15-year-old Alexandros Grigoropoulos in 2008 started around noon as high school students and others passed by the Greek parliament before ending up near the Exarchia district where the incident occurred. By the evening, the crowds had grown, with around 4,500 police officers facing hooded protesters throwing petrol bombs. Officers responded with tear gas and flash bombs to disperse the crowds. The riots spilled to nearby streets and neighborhoods, with protesters setting roadblocks and burning garbage bins. More than 10 people were arrested, with a further 20 detained. Around 6 police officers were injured, and 1 is in critical condition in hospital. The annual memorial was highly charged as it took place just a day after the shooting of a 16-year-old boy from the Roma community in Thessaloniki. The police say the boy has filled up his truck before fleeing without paying. He was later chased by police and shot. The incident led to protests by Roma groups in many cities and clashes between police and protesters. A police officer is expected to appear in court on Wednesday in relation to a shooting of a 16-year-old boy in Thessaloniki. Community groups are threatening with more and violent protests if justice is not served. Meanwhile, the teenage boy remains in a critical condition in hospital. Evangelos Tsipsas for CGTN, Athens.
The suspect accused of killing 5 people in a nightclub shooting in the United States last month is facing 305 charges. Anderson Lee Aldrich stormed an LGBTQ nightclub in the state of Colorado on November 19th. 22 more people were injured. The charges include murder, hate crimes, and assault.
A major oil spill on Venezuela's northern coast has forced beaches to close for 72 hours. 4-kilometre stretch of coastline has been polluted. One of the nation's major oil refineries is nearby, but the government has yet to announce the exact cause of the spill.
An investigation's underway into a commuter train collision in northeastern Spain that left more than 150 people injured. One of the trains was stopped at a station north of Barcelona when the other failed to brake in time. None of the injuries are reported as serious. Officials have previously complained of a lack of investment in the local rail network.
Still ahead on Global Business Europe. Morocco fans celebrate after their shock win over Spain. We'll be in Madrid as the Spain team return home after World Cup disappointment.
I fell in love with Chinese culture the second I started to experience it.
70 years ago, a small group of British businessmen travelled to China to unlock opportunities between the two countries. They became known as the icebreakers.
Building bridges is a natural thing. There is no age and gender difference in our spirit, no race difference in our soul.
I think food is an incredible way of bringing different cultures together. I am enjoying learning every aspect about it.
Chinese literature stretches back for millennia, but it's still really relevant for today.
I hope that Chinese and British fashion community could be more frequently communicating with each other.
An incredible mix of people, cultures, food, and there is so much to see and so much to do.
I have a great desire to make the Chinese civilization more accessible.
It's about our future generation's future.
The craftsmanship, the technique, the material uses, the color uses.
You can kind of take things on board and continue to develop and grow.
Meet the bridge builders, the individuals who dare to think beyond the horizon and open up our world.
Everything seems to have a story. I just think that's absolutely beautiful. A huge tick.
Hello, welcome back. Morocco fans around the world have been celebrating after their team's shock penalty shootout win over Spain in the World Cup last 16.
Morocco became the first ever Arab nation to reach the quarter-finals. Ashraf Hakimi, who was born in Madrid, scored the winning spot kick. Fans paraded through the streets in Doha, chanting "Morocco forever." Spain had been one of the favourites to win the World Cup, but instead they've just landed back at Madrid airport. And our correspondent Ken Brown is in Madrid for us. So Ken, what's the reaction been in Spain after the surprise win for Morocco and loss for Spain?
Yeah, hi Robin. As you say, I'm here in Barajas Airport in Madrid, where the Spanish team has just landed. It's been a pretty somber affair. No fans, no flags, no fanfare whatsoever. Just a media scrum, really, trying to get a few shots. And what a contrast to last night here in Madrid, where thousands of Moroccan fans piled into the streets to celebrate their team's victory. That party went on most of the night, and now, of course, Morocco look forward to a quarter-final against Portugal on Saturday, while the inquest has already begun here in Spain. Words like disaster and failure have been bouncing around the Spanish media, and the coach Luis Enrique, his position now in some doubt, with speculation already swirling about a potential successor.
So as you say, Ken, lots of partying going on from Moroccan fans, but we've also heard about some clashes. What more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, we have heard of some isolated clashes, really, between Spanish and Moroccan fans. I would say, from looking across the Spanish media today, that those were isolated incidents, as I say, and the celebrations largely passed off peacefully.
So Morocco are now through then, and they're going to play Portugal, who won their match against Switzerland, and that was done in very impressive style, wasn't it?
Incredible, absolutely incredible. I mean, imagine the night that Gonzalo Ramos had. You take off the country's icon, Cristiano Ronaldo. He gets his chance and he scores a hat-trick. I mean, he must still be dreaming. This game on Saturday, I think what we'll see, Morocco will probably try and play in a very similar way, but with this Portuguese attack, I'm not 100% sure they're going to be able to hold that down.
It's going to be a very exciting one, isn't it? Ken Brown in Madrid, thank you very much indeed.
A major concern for any World Cup host country is the challenge of moving hundreds of thousands of fans to and from all of the matches.
Qatar 2022 has invested in an all-new transport network, and organisers say hosting the tournament has accelerated a push towards more environmentally friendly transportation. Our correspondent Dan Williams reports.
Each day, tens of thousands of football fans in Qatar move among hotels, stadiums and tourist attractions, be it via metro, taxi or by bus. Qatar has bolstered its bus network in order to cope with the demands of the tournament, and 888 of them are electric, one of the largest electric bus fleets in the world. They are produced by Chinese manufacturer Yutong. The extreme heat in Qatar was a key consideration for the company.
Temperature here can reach more than 50 degrees in summer days. Once battery temperature beyond efficiency range, the cooling system will be activated, which can effectively avoid battery overheat.
Tani Al-Zarar is the local Supreme Committee's Mobility Operation Director. Each bus is equipped with an app, allowing fans access to Wi-Fi, as well as the ability to watch World Cup games on their phones during the journey.
Yutong were really very cooperative in terms of embedding this technology during the production of these assets, and then making sure the delivery time and the milestones are already met.
Yutong has already established a bus charging and service station in Qatar. A factory is scheduled to open next year and will be able to produce 500 e-buses annually.
Every major sporting event presents a significant logistical challenge. Making sure football fans can easily get to and from the games is a key focus. But organisers also had one eye on the future.
The electric bus fleet forms a part of Qatar's national vision, with an aim on sustainable development.
The World Cup was and still is a catalyst for the whole country to achieve their goals and missions. One of them is sustainability, and we have the public transport system is looking by 2030 to have all the green, all of the public transport is green public transport.
For now, the key focus is making sure these buses can transport football fans from match to match. But it's hoped the region will see benefits long after the last football is kicked. Dan Williams, CGTN, Doha.
The headlines once again. China's President Xi Jinping arrives in the Saudi capital for what's been called Beijing's biggest ever diplomatic initiative in the Arab world.
China continues easing COVID restrictions, allowing quarantine at home and domestic travel without testing.
And 25 people arrested in Germany as police say they've uncovered a far-right plot to overthrow the government.
That's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
More on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
See you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all the team here in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.